Good afternoon, and welcome to the Calix webinar, What You Need to Know About NTIA Performance Testing Requirements for BEAD. I'm Susan Friedman from Calix. Before we get started, I'd like to give you a tour of the webinar console and how to engage with us during the webinar. The webinar toolbar is at the bottom of your screen. Use the Q&A button to ask the panelists questions at any time. For technical issues or to share feedback, please use the chat button. Under the Resources button, you'll find speaker bios and additional content for you to view. During the webinar, we will have a few poll questions for you to answer. Thank you in advance for your participation in these polls. Today's session is being recorded. After the webinar, a shareable link to the recording will be sent to all who registered. With that, I'll hand it over to Ann Gunther, Director of Product Marketing. Let's get started.
Excellent. Thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone. We're excited to kick off the webinar featuring what you need to know about NTIA performance testing requirements for BEAD. Let's go ahead and hop to the next slide. Now, as we dive into today's discussion, we'll start with an overview of key considerations for next steps in your BEAD journey with a focus on performance testing requirements. And as part of this, we're going to carve out the differences between FCC and NTIA performance testing requirements and why it's important. Then we'll explore how to navigate these requirements, the tools, the expertise to run performance testing and reporting to ensure compliance. And we're going to be talking about how you can scale your existing resources to not only meet these requirements, but also for the longer term, how you can support your new growth from this funding and exceed subscriber expectations with a differentiated broadband experience. All right, next slide. Now, I would like to make some introductions. As you heard earlier, I'm Ann Gunther. I'm your host today and part of the product marketing team here at Calix. And I'm thrilled to have with us today Greg Bathrick, AVP of Commercial Development, Shane Carroll, RVP of Sales Engineering, Kevin Sievert, Senior Broadband Strategy Manager. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you here today. We're going to go to the next slide. And as we do so, we wanted to really understand your environment as we get into our topic today in terms of performance testing. Okay, so as you can see here, please let us know if you have done FCC performance testing before. It's pretty straightforward. And so with
And
that,
we want to talk about part of what we're going to do is adapt this to the presenters and
indeed.
structures that are here. So please let us know what you're having, and so we don't repeat this on a simpler basis. If you've seen this and you've done it, we'll abbreviate that and talk specifically about BEAD. If we need to talk a little bit about FCC performance, we'll talk about that as well. Thank you.
Okay, great. So on that point, Shane, I'm seeing that 76% have done FCC performance testing. So this is a great data point to help inform our following discussion. And we have
Absolutely. Thank you.
24% that probably needs some guidance here. So all good, all good. This is very helpful. We do appreciate the insight. All right, so let's go ahead and move to the next slide here and jump into today's discussion. So with BEAD representing such a significant opportunity to provide high-speed internet across the US by funding partnerships to build infrastructure, the ability to comply with performance testing and reporting requirements are essential for your success. And as you can see here, this is one of several important obligations. And so we want to ensure that you are in the know as you move through your BEAD journey. Next slide. Okay, and as part of this, there are a number of key considerations for the topic of performance testing and reporting. Okay, as you can see here, we have a list, right? And I'm gonna hit on a couple of these. Okay, so For instance, with your network design, there should be considerations to include testing capabilities at every subscriber location to streamline your compliance. So this always on approach ensures that you can activate it without disruption when you need to. Okay. Also, understanding your testing requirements and deadlines, right? That's a big part of today's discussion. So, for instance, how many and which subscribers do you need to test? What are the timelines for testing? What performance levels will you need to meet for speed and latency? How do you submit your reports to the state? What are the penalties and how to avoid them, right? Those are some big questions, right? We're going to be working through those today. Now, if your organization has experience with FCC testing, we saw that 76% of you do, much of the groundwork may already be in place, right? But but for the newcomers, right, adopting a proven approach can reduce your implementation time and risk. Okay. And of course, an important point here is also leveraging your industry resources to stay informed. And again, that's why we're here today. We're here to help you navigate the requirements and the complexities in your BEAD journey. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Shane to continue the discussion.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about FCC. I know most people here have done this. I want to say that we have additional resources available to talk about this more if you want more help with your FCC performance testing. So, but we will talk a little bit about what made FCC performance testing relative in this context. So what it did is it really allowed them to hold them accountable to all of the systems and processes that are out there. This is across many different programs, from CAF, CAF2 to RDOF, all of the fun things. And the penalties were up to 25% of the funding monthly subsidies. That's a lot of dollars that were at risk. It did 3 years after the approval, and you had to test quarterly and deliver results annually. That meant testing one week during that quarter and delivering those results to your upstream entity. And then what that required was an inclusive testing architecture, right? It had a testing controller that managed all this, but you had to have a test server, you had to have your network in the middle, and your test client on the other end. Calix has it all together where we had test clients, OLTs, ONTs, and into our GigaSpires, we actually had these test clients. What it allowed us to do is to measure the speed latency all the way to the home, all the way to the IXP, the peering point for your edge. And this allowed you to know exactly what's going on. So what did you test? We tested between 5 and 50 BSLs, which was 10% of your state with a max of 50. And we had to randomize it. And the randomization came from the portal, all the things that went with that. And then what it came down to at the end is you had to have at least 80% of the speed result measurements at least 80% of the time. That left times for things beyond your control, outages, upstream network issues, any of those kind of things. And then the latency testing, which was 95% of the latency measurement requirements at or 100 milliseconds or greater, with things like skips available for some cross traffic that's in there. So it was a really neat infrastructure. It was very, very special at the time. It was a new way of doing it, testing all the way to the internet and actually being able to test your peering points and everything through it. And it provided quite a bit of boundary and allowed us to start understanding networks in a wholly different manner. And I know that the FCC got a lot of data out of this and learned a lot of things, and they helped form some of the basis of this BEAD testing going forward. So with that, I want to roll that into the next piece, which is, since this is actually part of the state testing mechanisms that will be controlling the BEAD mechanisms, let's go to the poll. The next poll talks specifically about, has your state released testing requirements for BEAD? Since this is actually built around the state requirements versus an FCC requirement, we want to see if your states have actually done that. So if you go ahead and pop the poll in for us. All right. And what we're doing is we're basically seeing if any of the states have caught up with you guys and are ready to give you state BEAD requirements. So that's a great answer. So looking at it, only one or two people of you are able to give us a yes answer. Everyone else is either no or I don't know. Basically, the state hasn't told me anything. And this is why we're doing this webinar. We're actually here to help you understand what you're going to need to ask, what you're going to need to talk to your BEAD offices about and your state office to look at what's going on and actually work through that. And so for those of you that don't know, that's exactly why we're here today to help with that. And with that, I want to transition it over to Greg to continue this conversation.
Hey, thanks, Shane, for next slide. Thanks, Shade. And congratulations to all the ISP states and NTIA reps that have gone this far. We've been doing this for 4 years. 4 years ago, the Congress passed the IIJA bill. And today, we're at over 500 provisional awardees, totaling $20 billion. So that's pretty incredible. But let's talk about where things are going forward. The NTIA is stepping up with the approval. Last I looked was 32 final proposals, but what I'm hearing is that we'll be seeing the remainder over the next several weeks. So the ball really now is in your court, ISPs, and your court states to move things forward. It should be fairly smooth sailing, and funding, just given the amount of work up front, needs to be one of your key priorities. And that's really the reason we're doing this today. So much of the BEAD testing is based on FCC rules, as Shane talked about. But there are some critical changes. So I'm going to touch on some of those changes, and I'll also mention what hasn't changed. So the biggest change is the window between when you get funded and when you actually start testing. With the FCC is 3 years. With the BEAD testing, you could test as quickly as September this year. And let me tell you how that works. So if you're a company that's moving very aggressively, you want to turn up customers, you want to start pulling down service revenue in the first half of the year, and that gets done before the end of June, you will start testing in September. For many of you, and most of you, you'll probably take a more pragmatic approach. You'll be deploying after July 1st, 2026 and throughout the next 3.5 years. Everything deployed by June 30th, 2027 will test in September 2027. So the net out is that the testing is moving quickly, as you can see, and it certainly is sooner than 3 years. And for the 25% of the people on the call today, setting the test architecture is straightforward. However, there is a lot of pre-testing that you'll need to do, setting up that location of the server, and Calix will certainly help you with that. We could get into hours of talking about that. So now is really the time to move forward. If we can go to the next slide. So in the last slide, what we really established is that testing is once a year and is for 4 years. So let's start really digging into the nitty-gritty details. What are the main dates? So look all the way to the right side of the slide. What you'll see is January 31st, 2027, the states must report to the NTIA. So this is a drop dead date. That's not going to change. It's pretty solid. It's tied down. If you look at the date before that, because what's really on the mind of most ISPs is, tell me when I need to submit to the state. And on the slide, we have November 30th. Now, ultimately, this date will come from the states. So we did a little bit of thinking about this and a little bit of discussion informally, and we said, well, it probably would take 2 months, but ultimately you'll have to get the state. So, but we want to do that so we can back up another 2 to 2.5 months to say, okay, ISP, if you get something in your network by the end of June next year, you need to start testing in late September. So that kind of do the math, move forward. So that gives you kind of a sense of how quickly you need to move forward. All right, so now you know you're testing in 2026. What do you need to test? On the left side of the slide, what we'll talk about is that it's again, the locations in the network by the 30th, and it's the active locations. And you know this data because it's not the hub, it's actually the BDC data. So it's the data that you're collecting, and you'll move that forward. That is a big change from the FCC using the BDC data. You will need to randomize it, as Shane talked about. So no difference that you need to randomize, but you'll need to do the randomization or whatever the state dictates. So the state may come down with some sort of rules how to randomize and get down to that 10%. This part has not changed. Again, between 5 and 50 per test group. And Shane will talk a little bit about what the test group is in a second. Once you have a final list, you can turn up the testing quickly as long. And this is kind of one of the things that Ann was hinting on, as long as you put the test client functionality in the gateway itself, because what that's going to avoid is having to ship equipment and contacting the subscriber, getting all the schedules. So definitely something to put in your list of things to do. Number 3, how will the state evaluate? Now, a lot of rules are going to be very similar to the FCC, but I did want to mention, and this is something for those just getting into it. Yes, this testing is all about holding the ISP accountable, but it's not within reason. For latency, only 95% of the latency test needs to be below 100 milliseconds, only 95%. So it gives you a little leeway there. And on the speed test, only 80% of the measurements need to be within that window of 80 to 100% of the required speed. So that gives you kind of a window, and that's where you work with all the unknowns you're dealing with. Final note, and I'll hand it back to you, Shane. Final note is on the report that you'll be handing off to the state. They've reused the FCC CSV. They will change the index from the BDC ID to the hub ID. Now, again, this is an area where the state may add some things. So you need to go in this for all those first doing it. Look at what we did with FCC, talk to the state, figure out what the changes are and move forward. Shane, to you.
Yeah, I want to also point out before we make a slide
Sure.
change here, every state can have different rules, right? So
Oh,
if you want an award you have a group that spans multiple states, you may have to, even though you're testing the same technology across state lines, it could be very different. So I wanted to use that as a starting point before I get into my next slide.
Yikes. Thank you.
Not a problem. So when we look at this, Greg talked a little bit about it, right? In the FCC testing, the governing testing authority was the FCC, and they managed this through the USAC system. And so with USAC, it managed all the different locations and pieces. With NTIA's testing, they're delegating that authority to the states. So the states will actually be responsible for every single piece that goes through. And every state, hopefully, will actually be able to come to an agreement on the standards for this, but there's a chance they may not. We're hoping to help set those standards, and Calix is doing its part to work with all the entities that are part of this process to get that done. But what it'll do is the ISPs then take the lead from the states. So those states will dictate what the terms are with your different facilities and your contract vehicles, and then use that to actually tell you what's going to do. And different states, different rules bring different filings, different speed rates, different everything. So make sure you're very careful that if you're in multiple states, you look at multiple states because the rulings may be different, unlike the FCC testing before it. And as Greg said, the ISPs use the BDC location, not the hub like we did with the USAC data. So with this, you're going to have a different way of filing, a different way of systematically looking at it, and all the different pieces. So there's just different rules. They're all completing the same different pieces, but there's slightly different entities that are doing it. And as we heard before, right, the FCC was testing 3 years. BEAD could be really soon, like in, next year. We know that some of the states are finalizing funding right now. And if they get that funding out here very early in 2026 or even late 2025, if they can make it happen, then we're actually going to see that some of the testing entities are going to be ready to test next year. And that leads to that testing deadline of the end of the year so that they can roll it into the January date for 2027 to the NTIA. The penalties, pretty similar, but slightly different ways of doing it, right? The FCC was, you got up to 25% penalty on the reimbursements that were going on. On BEAD, the states will hold up to 20% of the bill during that reimbursement as well. But since it's a finite build, it's going to not be a recurring structure. So it's a little bit different on the way the state's penalties and structures work. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, there's different testing groups. In the FCC, it was basically where you were testing and its speed. So that was very easy to understand what you were doing. Now it's state, speed, and technology. So there's even a technology code you got to look at. So whether you're doing it on fixed wireless or fiber or all those different pieces, you're going to have to match up all those different things. And it's more groups to manage. So just a little bit more complexity, but gives a finer amount of data back to the NTIA to be able to understand how this system is helping the US and how it's leading us forward. One of the things that's changed is how they're doing the measurement. I talked a little bit about crosstalk earlier. When you had in the FCC testing, you basically had 64 kilobits of crosstalk. If you were less than that, then you were basically running the test. So if you were more than that, it went out. So it's a very, very, very tiny window. So just a single Netflix stream sometimes is enough to knock off the test. And if people let their testing run for weeks and weeks and they never got it through, then the testing didn't work. So they took some notes from the FCC and they basically said, well, realistically at the speed rates we're going to test and the technologies today, 10% of that rate is more applicable today. So now it's a 10% of the speed tier you're testing. So I'll use an example. Instead of getting a gig with 64 kilobits, your cutout rate for when you no longer do speed testing would be 100 megs. Very easy. If it's 10 gigs, it would be 1 gig. It becomes much easier to understand and you can do it based on a technology, and we're not getting artificially low bandwidth testing on small circuits. So 64 kilobits was great when we were looking at 100 by 25 or even 5 by 20 by 5 or something like that down the road. It's as the speeds get higher, we're seeing that this 10% is a better base. One of the big things that changes as well is you basically did not have to do latency testing. If you hit that crosstalk, there is no crosstalk 10% rate. You run latency testing regardless so that you actually get that. And the reason for that is that's really the user's experience, whether you're passing traffic, not passing traffic, all the different pieces that go on. It's basically a piece of how do I understand the broadband subscriber experience? One of the biggest things that we heard in the responses to the NTIA was buffer bloat. How do I measure this thing, this artificial being called buffer bloat? Well, to a user, it's about their experience. So if you test latency nearing all usage patterns, you'll get a closer anticipation of what the actual user experience is. So it was a great combination of using data from the SEC and the NTIA adapting and learning as they went forward. And then the speed compliance. The FCC tapped out a gig, right? It just was that. We've seen in BEAD that they're rewarding for 10 gig or more. And so the testing rate up to the rate specified in the BEAD application is what we're looking at. We're still figuring out what that means to the states. The NTIA set a floor that they have data for both their data and the community interest. COIA, so the Community Interest Association. So when you look at that, that was gig by gig for the community interest and 100 by 25 for the other. But we expect the states to want to match closer to the actual technology that they've actually put together. So we've seen people we're still qualifying the data. There's a lot of data out there, but some people were bidding greater than 10 gig. We're seeing also things like if you bid 10 gig on XGS-PON, that's problematic because while the technology can deliver 10 gigs of bits, usable bits is only really about 8.5 gigs. So we're going to need to work with you guys and you help qualify and help the states understand technology versus speed. And with that, it will be there. And this is one of the reasons we're having these conversations early is so that you guys can go talk to the states or the states talk to the ISPs and start understanding these boundaries and pieces as we go. So that's really the things that are very close and very similar in the SEC, but kind of changed a little bit. If you have questions, feel free to pop the questions in the Q&A. We've got a team there to help us. And we'll also have a Q&A at the end if you have specific questions. So with that, I want to take a moment and make sure we don't see any questions. No questions so far. All right, so let's go ahead and roll to the next slide. So what is very different? So what's very different from the FCC is they have this new concept of availability and reliability testing. Okay, everybody that just had their heartbeat start going faster, don't panic right now. So what it is we're looking to try to get 99.45 of annual uptime. That's basically less than 48 hours of downtime a year for each location. So they're trying to quantify that they expect the baseline for your broadband packages to deliver 99.45% of uptime. And that's what they really want it to be. So what that is they want you to report outages that exceed the threshold, defining the reasons. And so with that, they can basically look at it, start looking at reason codes and all the different pieces of why this happens and start going through all this. And this will allow them to understand more about the structure that's going on and all the different pieces that are functioning. So think about it from a technology standpoint, from a location standpoint. One of the things we were told is, hey, please go back. One of the things we were told is, if you look at this, what's the difference between an underground and a wire hung fiber passage? Is there a reliability difference that makes a difference for the cost of doing the facility? So it allows them to understand these reportings and understand it. And they all know things go wrong that are beyond our control. So that's things like natural disasters or force majeure. Very, very easy things, right? If you have a Hurricane Helene hit you and it's going to disrupt everything, that doesn't count. You're not going to really do it. Scheduled maintenance windows for you or your upstream partners announced in advance are available to take out of that data. So with that, that allows you to say, okay, reasonable maintenance is not counted against me in this. And if it's announced in advance, reasonably announced in advance, you can't just say, hey, 10 minutes from now, we're going to go down. It has to be a reasonable announcement of the maintenance window. It allows them to take that exclusion data out and not count that against you for things that you're doing to better your network. Things like power outage, power disconnects, and FEMA periods, like we talked about with Hurricane Helene, that is way beyond this, and those will be allowed to be taken out of this. What is not in the exclusion data is, hey, I have one of my peers on the call is in Colorado. They're basically in the middle of a windstorm. If they get the wind ripping out some of the fiber lines, then that's just the way they should have looked at underground fiber instead of overground fiber. Or if you're getting a rain fade because your technology is susceptible to water coming through the atmosphere, or if you're using 60 gig and you're susceptible to oxygen, all those things are things they want to understand about the susceptibility of the technology and what it counts against. And taking out things like force majeure and power windows, which unless you're the power company, that's a whole different conversation. But if you're not the power company, then being able to handle those force majeure that is not yours. And we also talked about upstream as well. If your upstream carrier disconnects you because they're doing maintenance and you don't have a redundant peering point, you're going to need to actually work through that. And as we get through it, we'll talk more about it. And then that schedule, the availability is calculated on 365 days before the performance testing period. So remember we talked about when you build it to the cutoff and all that. So there's a rolling 365 days of reporting of which you need to deliver that reporting. And right now, the penalties, the ISP will only be penalized if you don't submit the data. So this is definitely part of the fun that goes on and actually working through it. So we do know that states do have the option. They are the actual grantees of the different contracts, so they could put more exclusions in. We're hoping they don't. The reason this data is here is to help the government and the NTIA understand better the technologies and ramifications of how they're deployed, usability, functionality, and long-term usage of the technology. So we really want to work through that. And right now, now that I've kind of detailed a little bit, so I want to talk about a couple of the questions that come in. One of the questions that came in is how will testing differentiate between network availability and CPA availability? That is a very good answer. So power events, as we talked about in here, which are beyond your control, are things that you can track. If the customer is disconnecting their CPE equipment in the fiber world, you get a ONT dying gasp, it lost its power and its structure. If you're able to justify that of why the customer is paranoid and unplugs their ONT every day, then there are things that can justify it. But the vast majority of these things, if you just take a neighborhood power head, a tree hit a branch and takes out a subdivision, then that's an outage. That's a normal outage that would occur. But if you get the wind shut down, as one of my colleagues in Colorado, they may shut down entire blocks of the city she's in on notice because the wind could disrupt it and start a fire. That would actually become an outage. So, and would be going on an exclusion based on the natural disaster. The other question I saw come in is there an exception given for third-party fiber hits? The answer is no. When you look at it, it's your network, whether you're leasing that fiber from someone else or not. If they take a downtime, and they are able to justify it back to you, you can always put it in your notes on that outage. Remember, you're not actually held to account right now. They're just looking at data. That would give them great data on owning the fiber versus a third-party lease line or something along those lines. So when you look at those different pieces, all of this kind of adds up to where the availability is going on. So as this piece happens, we'll work through this. And we're learning too, right? The NTIA has given us this data. The states are digesting it, and they'll be working with you on this. So this is a moving target as we go on. And I know there will be a lot of questions over the time. We want to make sure this team is here to help you understand this. We have more resources that Ann will talk about later that are available to you. Hang on, ask questions here, and we'll have more spaces for you as we go forward. I don't see any more questions coming in. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Shane. So basically, I'm kind of acting as the clutch in this presentation as we're shifting gears. Greg and Shane provided a really good summary of the NTIA testing and comparing that to the better known FCC testing. But one of the things that is certainly different, and both Shane and Greg touched on this, is the NTIA allowed a lot of leeway for the states to develop a lot of the details of the performance testing. And so, as those states are developing this program, one of the things we wanted to just highlight right here is it's imperative for the ISPs to work with the state broadband offices. State broadband offices are typically not experts in network performance testing, and a lot of the ISPs have done this before, obviously from our poll question number one, and can use your expertise and help defining a performance testing that is going to be both useful for the state as far as collecting data and presenting that to the NTIA to make sure that the networks are being built as they were funded, right? And so there still are a lot of questions with regards to how the state is going to define those some of those requirements, right? The NTIA talks about these committed speeds and technologies. And what does that really mean? Is that mean they're going to test, the minimal 100/20 performance, or do they want to test the capability of the technology, or do they want to do both, right? And how often are they going to test? The NTIA talked about this once per year testing. Again, the state can do above and beyond that. What the NTIA did in their framework is they kind of defined what the minimum bar for performance testing requirements are. The states have the ability to further define that and collect more data as they see fit. And so that's one of the things that we wanted to just kind of take a breath. Encourage the ISPs to work with the state broadband offices, help them develop the performance testing requirements that best serve the industry and the state to make sure that the networks are being built as they've been funded. What we are going to do now is we're going to transition to talk about more talk more about Calix's performance testing platform. The first part of the webinar, again, was kind of that general requirements from the NTIA and comparing it to FCC. Now we're going to transition more into what is Calix's performance testing platform looks like and how we can help. And of course, those that answered that they haven't done any FCC testing before, again, feel free to reach out to Calix. We are the leaders in the industry when it comes to performance testing, and we would love to sit down with you and talk about how our solution can be integrated into your network to comply with the requirements of performance testing with the NTIA. So, Ann, I'll just hand it off to you. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. So as Greg, Shane, and Kevin have been sharing these insights to help you understand the BEAD landscape for testing and reporting, we're here to help you along the way, just like Kevin was stating here. And it's from building reliable networks that meet those funding requirements to the test controller that Shane was sharing earlier, right, for the funding, performance, and reporting, and providing the expertise every step of the way. We get it, right? We've worked with 74% of the federally funded BSPs in the US. It's using our cloud capabilities and services for that compliance and reporting. So we've helped these customers accomplish over 2 billion FCC performance tests. Okay. As we go to the next slide, please. One thing I'd like to reinforce here that our aim is to give a peace of mind, right, and assure the broadband service quality for BEAD. And it leverages a platform approach for performance testing. And with that approach, it's really there to help simplify the testing operations so that you can easily scale your existing team and resources and provide those value add services for the long-term sustainable growth. All right, next slide, please. And what we're going to do over the next series of slides, we're going to start big picture, right? And then we're going to drill down into the details. And so it starts here with the Calix broadband platform and BEAD compliance systems, right? That's the bottom part of what you're seeing here. And this is where it enables you to build the scalable and the secure networks that meet the funding testing requirements, right? And then using this platform, you can leverage Calix Cloud. That's that next layer. Okay. And this is the test controller for the funding performance testing and reporting. And it also collects, analyzes, and displays test data as insights so that you can accurately diagnose and address the broadband experience. And that experience, that bridges right into that top layer, right? And so this is the Smart Life Managed Services that gives you the value-added solutions to enable your subscribers and your communities to thrive. Okay, and all of this is supported by success, right? The designing, looking at the testing setup, the training, and much more. Okay. Now, as we go to the next, Shane,
And I
would
was
you
just
like
gonna
to
gonna mention
top off?
you
Yeah,
had
please.
the slides up there, and I see Calix ONT and Calix Gigaspires and all of the Calix systems. Does this only run on Calix ONTs and fibers?
No, it runs on more. Would you like to expand upon that?
Sure. I guess I led to my own question. So
Well
when you
done.
look to it, you basically our Gigaspires can either be fiber fed or Ethernet fed. Because they're Ethernet fed, that allows us to be able to use any technology where we could plug in Ethernet. So if your upstream is a fixed wireless, your upstream is LEO, if your upstream is cable, for a coax DOCSIS facility, all of those can be tested across our platform. It's not just Calix in the middle. It's the full testing platform and the ability to help you with success, like we talked about before, and bring it all together. So whether you're using a Calix end to end, where we've got BEAD compliant solutions, or you're using another solution that has Ethernet in the middle, we can do the testing that makes that BEAD solution complete from you and be able to deliver those results regardless of the testing facility.
Nice. Excellent point. And folks, any questions? Okay, we're going to keep moving here then. Um, okay, now again, we're going to go on a deeper dive. And this is to look at how you can support your new BEAD network and the performance testing. And then down the road, how do you manage and support the service that you're delivering, right? And to help, enter Calix Cloud, right? I touched on this in the previous slide, right? And this really helps to provide the end-to-end experience management. So it not only helps to deliver that seamless service, but also reduce OpEx. As you can see here on the left side, okay, there are a number of capabilities and to help with that efficiency, right, there's the tight integration with the systems. There's automation, right? And there's this end-to-end visibility that really helps to ensure that with that efficiency, you can manage the network performance and that subscriber experience. Okay. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, we're going to keep drilling down. And so core to all of this is the speed and latency testing, right? And it has, of course, a couple of critical use cases. What's top of mind for today is, of course, the performance testing to comply with those funding requirements. And as you can see here, we start them so it would be really obvious, right, in terms of how this comes together. Now, also though, with or without funding, this framework that we're going to be unpacking for you, it measures the broadband service quality, right? And this is, of course, fundamental to understanding and managing the subscriber experience. Okay, next slide. And so this is where we're going to really get into the speed testing framework that comprises our Calix Speed and Performance Insights. Okay, we're very focused on this. And as you can see here, any stakeholder, if you look on the left, right, they can use this, right? So think of your CSR, customer service representatives, your broadband ops, and even your field technicians, right? Also the subscribers, they're going to want to check so that they can measure the quality of their service tier. So when we look at this matrix, right, and we go from left to right, our stakeholders are on the left, and they use these applications that are next there in order to conduct the testing. And then over on the right, we have that span of use cases, right? And circled there for you is the funding performance testing. Okay. And so this gives you a good view of what that framework encompasses. All right. So let's hop to the next slide. And I'm going to very quickly double click on a couple of the use cases here. So obviously for today's focus, it is the funding program compliance and reporting, right? This is to ensure that you can validate that service performance for the program obligations, right? Another great example here is again coming back to the CSR, the ops and the field techs. They can leverage the same speed testing framework to validate installations, right? Or to troubleshoot, like testing and doing diagnostics to isolate a network issue. Okay, so some great use cases there for you. And as we segue to the next slide here, right, we're going to now look at what is supporting all of this, right? We have these flexible server options here. Now, on the left is our cloud-based TR-143 global testing network, which is a hosted model for on-demand speed testing and funding performance. So there's no need for you to acquire your own servers. On the right side is our on BSP premises TR-143 multi-gig server option if you need the best performance testing for up to 10 gig high-speed services, or you want to test on the Calix ONT systems. Now, if you have a need for both, that's fine. It's flexible. Okay.
And
The
Anne,
pro
I
Oh
want
yeah,
to,
please,
I also
Shane,
want to
hop
top up a
in.
little bit here on this. One of the
Nice.
interesting things is, if you notice, they're both based on TR 143, which is a
Mm,
standard. So we're using
yep.
standards-based testing on this. And believe it or not, those are the same systems, just in different locations. Calix will either host the servers in the performance cloud for you, so you don't have to deal with your peering point. We're using a global partner that brings all that together, so you don't have to really understand the peering points quite as much as you did in the FCC testing using one of our previous performance testing partners. Or we can bring our own server. The interesting thing about bringing your own server is, let's say you and another ISP share a colo and you actually have an upstream peering point. You could put one of these servers in there, control your own destiny, go one upstream hop further, and be able to deliver your own speed and performance testing with a server you completely control end to end. So this gives you the best of all worlds in the way we're going about this testing. Whether you want it fully hosted where you don't have to worry about it, or you want complete control of this from end to end, Calix supports that option both ways.
Excellent. Thank you, Shane. So the point here, right, is that we're providing a complete spectrum of your performance testing capabilities and making it easy for you, right, with an all-in-one solution. Again, coming back to that peace of mind, right? And so when we hop to the next slide here, so as you navigate your BEAD journey, right, you take on those next steps, you lay the groundwork for performance testing and reporting. Take into account the key considerations, the requirements, the guidance that we've shared here today to help you along the way, right? So this right here is just a quick reference for you so that you can see how we can partner with you and help keep it simple, right? And give you the support that you really need. As I shared earlier, we've worked with 74% of the federally funded BSPs in the US. And with this experience, right, you get years of collective expertise to ensure your success. Okay. Now, with that, we do have one more poll. Okay. So, Susan, if you would kindly share that, that'd be awesome. And this poll is about continuing the conversation, right? So if you have more questions, right, you'd like additional information, we're happy to help. We're happy to connect. Just please let us know in this poll so we can do so. Okay, and as you're completing the poll, no rush, we're going to go ahead and jump to Q&A and see if we have any more questions.
Yeah,
Susan, all right. Oh,
Oh,
please
one
go
thing I
ahead.
wanted to jump in on this
Yeah.
poll. Definitely, anybody out there, if there's any questions from the webinar, if you want to go
Mm-hmm.
to the next step, even if it's at the level of the state, we're working with many of the states and we can help translate from the NTIA to the state rules. We're there every step of the way. And we, our service that we provide actually could even help you test.
Right.
Back to you.
Okay, great. And so, Susan, any other questions that might have popped in?
Yes, and thanks everyone for taking that poll. It was mentioned that the NTIA requires an annual test report every January 31st for 4 years. Is it expected or is it even possible that the state broadband offices may require more frequent test dates from ISPs? Kevin, that sounds like it's your area of expertise.
Sure, I can answer that. So again, the FCC or the FCC, the NTIA defined the minimum, set of requirements, and so the NTIA has, uh, you know, defined a one annual test to be performed on the network during the 4 years of the period of performance. Um, but again, as I said, the NTIA allowed the states to really define their own testing requirements on top of that. And so some of the states that we've talked to have been looking at potentially, doing a closeout test in which they would do a larger test of all of the locations that might be served, or a percentage of those. They also have talked about, again, doing a capacity test, right? If they're just looking at the 100/20, making sure that they're meeting the federal minimums. They also, some states have been interested in making sure that these networks have been deployed in a way that supports the original, application and the intended use. So, if you put that you were going to provide a gigabit symmetric service on in your application, then some states have said, I want to make sure that the funding went to a network that's able to deploy that. So they could ask for, a max speed test over a set of locations just to test that. There's closeout tests and other things that they could define. And again, that's just going to be on a state by state basis.
Thank you. We have another question, and it looks like Shane wants to answer this one live.
Sure. So there was a question in here that asked, will Calix implement a new test mechanism for NTIA that's different than the FCC mechanism? The answer to that in short form is yes, but it's more complicated than that and easier. Calix is building the underlying engine that does this testing. Whether it's a 10-second test or a 15 seconds test, whether it's one technology type or another technology type, we're absorbing all of that into our test platform to be an end-to-end solution. So we are building that. That is scheduled to go live next year, where we'll be ready for testing that occurs early in the year next year. So think first half to third quarter of next year, basically ready for your testing that you'll need to do for the state. And that will actually be part of our service platform that we already have today, our service cloud platform. And so that allows us to do that for you. It'll have the different fields that allow you to select whether you're doing a BEAD test or an FCC test. All that stuff is being worked on right now, so we don't have a prototype to show you here live today, but be advised we will deliver that next year so that you'll be ready for the testing that's coming forward. The other question I saw was, if we're currently working with a Calix rep on our PMM testing, will that same rep work with us on the BEAD testing? Yes. So they will be different test platforms. That is scheduled. Again, this is a future thing, right? Right now, all this is still being baked as a technology and a process. But we are planning to have the same kind of services and platforms that are going on. And you want to talk a little bit more about the expectation on where we're going with that?
Sure. In terms of how
Sorry,
we're,
where our services platform is going to grow to service all of the BEAD platform.
Sure. So, as you shared earlier, that's, something that we are actively evolving right now. And so as we have more information available, we'll be obviously sharing that with you. I'm envisioning that we have more webinars along this line, right, to help navigate and frame that information. Is there anything in addition, Shane, that you were going to fold in there?
Just that the services will be tailored to the BEAD systems, just like they're tailored to the FCC testing.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
I have a note that I wanted to pass along as well that says from our NTA panel that has joined us illustriously on this has also said the NTIA does not permit states to add additional testing requirements. It's not simply a floor. So again, we are not speaking for the NTIA here. We're giving the perspective of Calix's definition of what we've heard thus far. So reference your NTIA representatives, reference the actual testing documents itself and use that as the availability, and states themselves will need to work with that to deliver that to match the FCC's, I'm sorry, the NTIA's testing need. Apologize about that. I want to make sure we were clear on that.
And I have one more question.
Okay.
I know the speed requirements for BEAD are 100 meg downstream and 20 meg upstream. Did you say that we might have to test at a higher speed than that? Is that another Kevin question?
Sure, I'll take that.
Okay.
Again, the NTIA left that fairly open. They have stated that the minimum requirement is to make sure that the BEAD funded locations are must meet the 100/20. But again, I believe the states have the ability to define other testing outside of that. So it is possible that states will require additional testing at different speeds.
I don't see any more questions.
Do appreciate the questions, though. These have been great.
Okay, any closing remarks from our panel?
Well, let's go ahead and wrap up for today. We really want to thank you all for joining us. We appreciate your time, your engagement, and we hope you have a great rest of your day and very happy holidays. Thank you. Take good care.
And if you have any follow-up questions or would like to have a one-on-one discussion, you can book a free consultation with us via calix.com. Have a wonderful holiday season. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.